There comes a moment in life, quiet, almost unnoticeable at first, when you realize that certain pieces of advice aren't really advice at all. They're warnings, hard-earned, often painful warnings that exist to protect you from mistakes that can't be undone. This is one of those moments. I'm 83 years old. My name is Margaret. And 8 years ago, just 3 months after my husband Richard passed away, I came within 2 weeks of remarrying. 2 weeks. 2 weeks away from signing a marriage license that could have cost me everything. My home, my savings, the inheritance I'd planned for my children, and perhaps most importantly, the fragile sense of self I had only just begun to discover after a lifetime of being someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's mother. I walked away. The invitations had already been sent. The dress was hanging in my closet. The church was booked. Everything was ready. And I said no. People didn't understand. They called me cold. They said I was letting grief control me. Some said I was afraid. Others said I'd regret it when I grew old and lonely. But what they didn't know, what nobody tells women, is that remarriage after 60 carries realities that can quietly dismantle everything you spent your life building. I didn't know those realities either, not at first, but I learned them just in time. And I'm going to tell you what I almost learned the hard way. Because if you're considering remarriage, or if someone is gently, or not so gently, pushing you toward it, you need to hear this before you sign something that changes everything. Richard died on a Tuesday morning, a heart attack, quick, no suffering, the kind of death people say they hope for. And in the beginning, I was numb. There were arrangements to make, papers to sign, people coming and going, bringing food, offering condolences, filling the house with voices that didn't quite reach me. But eventually, they all left, and what remained was silence, a kind of silence I had never known before. I had never lived alone, not once. I went from my parents' home to my husband's, 75 years of life, and I had never spent a single night in a house by myself until then. The loneliness wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It felt like weight, like something pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And that's when the suggestions began. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone," my daughter told me. "There are good men out there," my son said. "Dad would want you to be happy." Friends from church, neighbors, even distant acquaintances, they all seemed to agree on one thing. I needed to find someone. At first I resisted, but loneliness is persuasive. Slowly, I began to wonder if they were right. Maybe I wasn't meant to be alone. Maybe this emptiness meant something was wrong. Maybe finding someone new was the next step. That's when I met Walter. He was 78, a widower, kind, polite, steady, the kind of man people describe as good. We met at a church dinner, started with casual conversation, then coffee once a week, then twice, then dinners, then daily phone calls. He was consistent, reliable, safe. 6 months after Richard died, Walter proposed, not with romance, but with practicality. "We're both alone," he said over dinner. "It makes sense to combine our lives, take care of each other." Take care of each other. It sounded comforting, so I said yes, not because I was deeply in love, but because I was lonely, because everyone said I should, because it felt like the right thing to do. We began planning a small wedding, and then 2 weeks before it was supposed to happen, everything changed. The first reality came from a conversation that chilled me. A friend told me about her sister, how she remarried in her late 60s to a man who seemed financially stable. He wasn't. After the wedding, the truth surfaced. Debt, medical bills, financial obligations she never knew existed. And once they were married, those problems became hers. Legally, her savings drained, her credit collapsed. Her home, once fully paid off, was leveraged just to stay afloat. Everything she had spent decades building disappeared in a few short years. That story forced me to ask questions I hadn't asked about Walter's finances, his debts, his obligations. He didn't like those questions. "Why does it matter?" he said. "We'll share everything." Exactly. That was the problem. I spoke to a financial advisor. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Marriage, she explained, isn't just emotional. It's legal and financially binding in ways most people don't fully understand. Debt can become shared. Assets can become vulnerable. Medical costs, legal obligations, even decisions made years before you met someone can all land on your shoulders. It was the first time I realized that remarriage at this stage of life isn't just a romantic decision, it's a financial risk, a significant one. The second realization was quieter. It didn't come from someone else. It came from watching myself. In the months I was with Walter, I began adjusting. Small things at first. Changing plans, rearranging my schedule, giving up little habits I had just started enjoying. After Richard died, I had begun to discover something new. Freedom. I ate when I wanted, slept when I wanted, watched what I wanted, lived without explanation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fitting into someone else's rhythm. And slowly, without even noticing, I started giving that up. Not because Walter demanded it, but because I had spent decades learning how to accommodate. One morning, it hit me. I was disappearing again. That realization unsettled me more than I expected, because I had only just started finding myself. The third reality came from my children. One, conversation in particular. My daughter asked me what would happen to my home, my savings, everything I had planned to leave behind. I didn't have answers, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, not about money, but about losing something deeper, a sense of continuity, of family, of what had been built over a lifetime. I spoke with an estate attorney, and what he explained was simple, but heavy. Marriage changes legal priority. Spouses often come before children. Even carefully written plans can be challenged. Even clear intentions can become complicated. It wasn't about distrust. It was about reality. And it forced me to think about consequences I hadn't considered. The fourth realization came from watching someone I cared about. A friend who had remarried, her husband became ill, and what began as companionship turned into full-time caregiving. At an age when energy is limited, when strength is no longer guaranteed, the responsibility was overwhelming. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. And she said something I'll never forget. I thought I was gaining a partner. I didn't realize I was taking on a life I might not be able to sustain. It made me reflect on my own limits, on what I had already lived through, on what I was and wasn't willing to carry again. But the fifth realization was the one that changed everything. It came from a question I finally asked myself honestly. Why am I doing this? And the answer wasn't love. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even true companionship. It was expectation. It was fear of being alone. It was the belief that this was what I was supposed to do. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't ignore it. Because making a permanent decision based on temporary loneliness is a risk that can reshape the rest of your life. So I made a different choice. I called off the wedding 2 weeks before it was supposed to happen. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, disappointment, judgment, but there was also something else, relief, a deep, undeniable sense that I had chosen something true for myself, not what others expected, not what fear suggested, but what I genuinely wanted. Now, years later, I live alone, and I'm not lonely in the way I once feared. I have space. I have peace. I have a relationship with myself that I never had before. And that, I've learned, is something incredibly valuable. This isn't about telling anyone what they should or shouldn't do. It's about understanding the full picture, about making decisions from clarity, not pressure, from awareness, not assumption. Because sometimes the most important thing you can protect isn't your heart from being alone. It's your life from being reshaped in ways you didn't fully see coming. If you're standing at that crossroads, take your time, ask questions, look beyond the surface, and most importantly, be honest with yourself. Because whatever you choose, it should come from a place of understanding, not fear, not expectation, but truth. And that makes all the difference.